Very good. Yes. Check. Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Borovac, and I'm the General and Artistic Director of New Orleans Opera, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Guild Home for this recital this afternoon. We're very happy to see you. Thank you so much for coming out. I have a couple things before I turn it over to Tara. First of all, I want to start with our land and people acknowledgement. The New Orleans Opera would like to take the time to acknowledge the land that present-day New Orleans sits on, which is known by the native people as Bulancha, or the place of many tongues. This place is home to centuries of stories, families, communities, music, dance, art, movement, and migration. And we want to center the Choctaw, Huma, Chitimacha, and Biloxi nations who called this place home long before history was written down. Please join us in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. A couple of housekeeping things just to share with all of you. If you haven't already picked it up, you'll definitely want our text that we have for all of the songs so that you can follow along with the text as the performers are singing. Please hold your applause until the end of each set. There will be an aria to start with, and then 2 sets of songs, and then a final aria at the end. Please make sure you've got your cell phone turned off. Hi. And yeah, that's the housekeeping. So now I'd like to introduce our Director of Community Partnerships and Education, Dr. Tara Melvin, to tell us a little bit about today's program.
Thank you so much for being here. This is more than we could have dreamt when we talked about this, because no one's ever tried it before. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what Opera Nouvelle is. The Opera Nouvelle series, which we are here for, is a vehicle for presenting new music and introducing new ways of interpreting, experiencing, and thinking about opera. There's a dearth of music by composers of the global majority in Western classical music. Representation and access are equally essential components of familiarizing the classical music community in the U.S. with these works and composers outside of the canon. New Orleans Opera would like to address this issue by programming recitals by BIPOC composers and featuring BIPOC artists. Fantasies of Asia is a recital that directly addresses the complicated relationship the United States has with the Asian and Asian American communities. This recital program is a vehicle for Asian and Asian American artists to tell their own stories in their own words. So, if anybody has seen all of the marketing materials for this, anybody over the age of 30, you probably noticed that the title of this is Storytellers, because I am a child of the 80s and 90s. Who remembers what Storytellers was on VH1? I see somebody out there. That's exactly what we're going to do today, because what is opera but storytelling? So in between each of these pieces, our artists, our composers, which we are so blessed to have here with us, will be talking about these pieces that we will hear. So I want to introduce you to our artists and composers right now. And after I do that, we will begin the program. So firstly, sitting right in front of me is Tran.
Yeah.
I will let him talk a little bit more about himself, but I'm sure all of you know him because on top of being a composer and a fantastic musician all around, he does our marketing and social media for New Orleans Opera because apparently he doesn't like sleep. All right, and so then I would like to introduce Yoshida Nelsen, Douglas Sumi, and André Chiang, and they will also tell you about themselves. Please give them all a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary folks, here are our storytellers.
Thank you so much for being here today with us as some of the Madame Butterfly cast digs into an afternoon of Asian American themed repertoire. There are many reasons you might be here today, but what we all hope is that one of these reasons is to learn. Anytime I create art, one of my first questions I ask is why? So before we go any further, I thought I'd explain my why for today. Why is this recital important? Why do we program educational events around Madame Butterfly? And why is it important to share these stories? Madame Butterfly is an Orientalist opera written in the early 1900s by a white man who had never been to Japan. This was before the invention of the internet, so Puccini couldn't just pull up Google and search 15-year-old Japanese girl and write an educated, reality-based story. He used his imagination. Orientalism evolved in Europe as a way for Westerners to tell exciting stories that were taboo within their own society. If we set it just over there in the East, where it's far enough away that nobody really knows what's happening over there, nobody will know the difference. Those people over there did this disgusting thing, be it orgies or one-night stands with 15-year-old doll-like geishas. It was happening over there, not here in our own society. But gosh, isn't it exciting to think about those naughty things that were happening over there? There was no fact check, no way to dispute it. So, is Butterfly problematic? Yes, it is. Is this okay? It can be, as long as it's addressed when we're producing it. So how can we address it? If you see Butterfly in Japan, there isn't ever any outcry like there is here in the United States. Why? Because in Japan, it's not the only representation. You turn on TV or see another play or an opera, and you have many representations of Japanese people. You have fat Japanese people, skinny Japanese people, old, young, tall Japanese people, and yes, even some short Japanese people. So Butterfly is just one of those many representations when it's produced there. But here in America, in the United States, where Asian Americans live as a minority, there is very little Asian representation on TV, the movies, stage, or even the news. And this is where Butterfly becomes problematic. Whether you are aware or not, when you go to the theater and watch Madame Butterfly, part of what you witness on stage subliminally, or maybe not even subliminally, goes into your brain. And how you experience those Japanese women on stage will seep into how you see us in your society. When it's the only representation, it becomes a stereotype. You start to think of Japanese women in the only way you have ever seen them represented. So part of why we're here today is to offer you a larger view of what it means to be an Asian American in today's America. We are here to offer you our real-life stories as an insight, as education, and perhaps most importantly, as representation. In a time where hate crimes against Asians have skyrocketed, where I myself am scared to stand near the edge of a subway platform for fear of someone maybe pushing me over the edge. Rhetoric matters, and harmful rhetoric is dangerous. We hope you'll leave here today with a little more knowledge, understanding, empathy, and compassion of what it's like living in our shoes. We also hope that when you're in the audience of Butterfly in a few weeks, that you will take some time to think deeper about what you're seeing on stage, how representation matters, and how, if you have no other Asians in your lives, at least you will think of us, who you are building a connection with today, and how we, as real, living, breathing human beings, might be impacted by this art. The first piece on our recital is an aria from the opera An American Dream. An American Dream was premiered in Seattle in 2015. It centers around a Japanese-American family who is taken from their home and sent to a prison camp during World War II. People are often surprised to learn that this is something that actually happened in the United States. In fact, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were taken from their homes and put into prison camps. 2/3 of them were citizens who had been born and raised in the United States and had no connections to Japan other than the fact that it was their heritage. They literally lost everything, their homes, their jobs, their businesses, and perhaps most importantly, their civil liberties. The liberties that we all are supposed to enjoy as American citizens. They brought with them only what they could carry. And to bring this even closer home to you, both my grandparents and Doug, who's here on the piano, his grandparents were some of those over 120,000 Japanese Americans who were incarcerated. They lost everything, experienced extreme racism, and even after they were let out, they were left with less than nothing. The rebuilding of our loss has taken generations, and it is now our generation who is telling their stories. This is an aria that was written for me after the composer and librettist interviewed my grandmother about her experiences being incarcerated during World War II. This interview created How Someday, an aria filled with hope, dreams, and wishes that are all shattered by the US government.
Hi everyone, can you hear? Yeah, I can hear me, so you should be able to hear me. Okay, like Tara said, I am André Chiang. I'm originally from Mobile, Alabama, born and raised, so I am welcomed back to this area by the humidity because I currently live in Las Vegas and I teach at UNLV. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about why these pieces sort of exist, at least in my orbit, and then I'm gonna let Dylan talk about his whole process with them. My last position, I had an opportunity to apply for funding for certain sort of artistic projects, and I was thinking what would be cool, what would be fun, what would be interesting. I've sung a lot of classics, like I've started getting more into new art song commissions and sort of that area, and so I thought, okay, that would be great. Now, what do we need, right? We have lots of recordings of the greats. We have a lot of recordings of the really high-end composers that have had a lot of opportunity, but what I started realizing is that there's a whole generation of composers whose music needs to be heard, and I wanted to make an album of that in order to flesh out my own desires of figuring out like what art song means to me and how the art form can progress, but also to just make sure that we're not just singing the same new music. We don't want the new music to become so similar that we forget about all the other composers. So that had me thinking, whoa, identity, what do I want to do? And then I thought, I remember sort of like parsing through my brain and thinking, I want some music written by an Asian American composer. I want some music that could sort of tie into the idea of identity as I was searching for I'm sure we'll talk about this in the talk back, but I've had a very interesting experience just being from and being raised in Alabama. So I remember seeing a lot of Dylan's work on the internet. Dylan's great about putting his stuff on the internet, which is great because it's also awesome. And I reached out and was like, hey, are you interested in writing some pieces for me? And we chatted about it. And he actually had this great sort of moment where he wanted to write certain pieces that were already sort of percolating in his brain. So we'll let Dylan talk about these pieces.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Tran. I'm an artist based here in New Orleans. I want to tell you the story of how I met Andre. It's super short. I was 20 years old at Loyola University, and I saw a concert of Carmina Burana, full orchestra, full chorus, and Andre was a soloist. And I was, yeah. He didn't know I was there. I did talk to him afterwards, but he was pretty busy. I was enthralled by this guy's performance and super inspired, and I just became an immediate fan. And so when 7 years later, he approached me about this commission, I freaked out, and I don't know, it was super surreal. So I just wanted to say thank you and express my gratitude to Andre for the opportunity. It's super cool to work together. I also want to say that despite the intense weight of the subject matter that we are singing and speaking about today, it's also been kind of fun. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way at all. I was just thinking about yesterday, we had our rehearsal, and there were just so many laughs as we were navigating all of this new music together, which I think that's a duality that is an integral aspect of the Vietnamese American experience, this idea of holding space for both joy and pain, holding space for both sacrifice and celebration. I feel it's integral to the Asian American experience, any diasporic experience, any trauma-informed experience. This piece is dedicated to my late father. His name was Dan. He was born in Saigon, Vietnam in 1950. He served as a pilot in the Vietnam War, and after the fall of Saigon, on April 30th, 1975, he came as a refugee to the exotic land of Louisiana, Alexandria specifically, which is where I am from. I'm gonna move on from talking about him, actually. This cycle has a through line, and I feel like the question that pulls us through the whole song cycle is how can one person be capable of such warmth and love and affection, and also of such anger and violence? The cycle has a central character. There are 5 songs. Each one is a memory from that character's perspective about their father. And the poetry is just packed full of themes. I'll just talk about a few. There's a theme of PTSD and how it can actually be passed down as generational trauma. And as far as the Vietnamese experience, I mean, the fall of Saigon was April 30th, 1975. That was less than 50 years ago. And so every single one of our elders and many of our parents, even if they were not directly involved in the fighting of the war, they suffered the intense and sustained trauma of a country at war, of fleeing your home with only the things you can carry, of making a new home in a new country, and the adversity that is faced in doing that. There's the theme of water as a metaphor for separation, both from your community, from your culture, from your family, even from yourself. And there is also the theme of parentification, which is a dynamic where a child is forced to take on the role and the responsibilities of a parent. I'll speak a little bit more on my father. He passed away when I was 16 years old. He was in the hospital for 4 months, and during that time I was one of his primary caretakers. And after he passed, I then supported my mom, both emotionally and often financially for several years. And that is just one example of what parentification is. It happens in many forms and in many ways. So that question we come back to. How can one person be capable of such warmth, love, and affection, and also such violence and anger? Now we know that the answer to that question is all of these themes that are covered in the poetry that you'll hear today. But as a child and as the person who is experiencing them, those answers are not clear. And so through the cycle, we will bounce around between these moments of affection, these moments of anger, these moments of love, and these moments of violence, and it will create this feedback loop that just becomes more and more intense, and we become more and more desperate, and then finally at the end, we all have an epiphany. There's a line at the end of the piece. I am chasing my father the way the dead chase after days. The way the dead chase after days, which to me means an understanding that there are some things and some people that we will never fully understand, and that there can be virtue in letting go. I realized as I was finishing up the piece that the line, I am chasing my father, to me it really means I am chasing all of the things that I feel I never had. I feel like I am chasing love, I am chasing community, I am chasing security and belonging. And so at the end of the cycle, we have this epiphany, and then we're left, we, the audience, everyone together, is left with this question: what do we do now? And how do we move forward? This question that is both a burden and a blessing. How do we move forward? I've not written that piece of music yet, but I will let you know when I do. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy my piece, Poems from Ocean.
One of the most exciting things about being part of a diverse group of performers working on contemporary music is that we get both the privilege and the responsibility of forming the canon. So some of this music that you may hear today may be the next Madame Butterfly, and it may be something that sticks with us for generations to come. It's such an honor to be able to do that. The last piece on our program is something that I think should be part of the canon. It's an opera called An American Soldier by the famed librettist, playwright David Henry Hwang and the composer Huang Ro. This opera is based on a true story about Private Danny Chen, a Chinese-American man who shortly after the 9/11 stuff went, he lived in New York City, and so shortly after 9/11 he decided he was going to enlist in the army. And he really wanted to prove to his country that he was American. As it would have it, he went into the army and was hazed extremely because of his Chinese heritage. So much that he eventually ended up dead. This opera takes place in the courtroom after he's passed away, as his commanding officer is being tried for these crimes. And as it turns out, at the end, you find out that the commanding officer only is to spend 30 days in jail and charged $1,100 docked from his paycheck. And that was what came from the murder of Danny Chen. Since then, President Obama has instilled a bunch of anti-hazing laws in Danny's name, and this opera is really important. I sing the role of Danny's mother, and this aria comes at the very end of the opera after we found out that the commanding officer has been, instead of spending life in jail, will be there for 30 days. And this is a lullaby to my dead son, one last time, talking about the lullaby that I sang to him as a child. And I say, it's okay, you can go now. Your time here is done. So, right after this aria, we will take a short pause, and we encourage you to write any questions that you might have on note cards that are available in the other room, and then we will come back for the community conversation. And we look forward to talking about everything that we've experienced here today. Thank you.
Any other 318s in the house? I thought so. My fun fact about my family is that my dad had 11 kids. So I have 10 siblings. and I will let you guess what my birth order is.
Your mother had this.
What was the question? Where am I from? I'm from Tulare, California, which is central California, and my family. My father's a farmer, grandfather a farmer, so I grew up in the middle of vineyards of table grapes in central California.
Hi, I'm Andre. I'm from Mobile, Alabama, born and raised. My fun fact is that I am first generation American, but also that my dad only moved to Mobile because he was approached by a Baptist, what's the word? No, it's like recruiter, but for missionary. Thank you, a Baptist missionary in Singapore, and so all my family's in Singapore, and he moved over with my mom the year before I was born. So that's super fun. Yeah.
Hi everybody, my name's Aria Umazawa. I am the stage director of Madame Butterfly. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And a fun fact about my family, I don't know, I should have thought before I got the mic in front of me. My dad, when we were younger, wanted to teach us about our Japanese heritage and briefly enrolled us in Japanese lessons, but realized it was hard to teach the language without immersing all of his children. So instead, he enrolled us in karate. And we were required to go 5 days a week for over a decade, all of us.
Don't mess with Aria.
I'm Nina Yoshida Nelsen. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, California. I'm fourth generation Japanese American, half Japanese American, and I currently live in Bloomington, Indiana. My husband is a French horn player and he teaches at the university there. We have two sons, a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. The 12-year-old, here's my fun fact, the 12-year-old played a concerto at Carnegie Hall a couple months ago.
Overachiever, he's already been to Carnegie Hall.
Twice?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, I should mention that I was born and raised here in New Orleans. I am the son of Taiwanese parents, and both of my parents are pharmacists. They both graduated from Xavier School of Pharmacy, and both of them ended up working at hospitals. My father started out at Charity Hospital, then he was a pharmacist at Children's Hospital. My mother spent her entire career at the VA hospital, and she also worked at University Hospital, Hotel Dieu, which turned into University Hospital. I think she spent a while at Baptist Hospital. Even my brother is a pharmacist. He started out at Ochsner Hospital. He graduated from the Auburn School of Pharmacy, which is in Mobile. He started out at Ochsner. Now he's at Huntsville Hospital, so in Alabama. So I'm the only member of my family who is not a pharmacist. I'm actually following in the footsteps of my grandfather. He was a professor of Chinese literature and now modern Chinese literature, and I work with Chinese history. Anywho, so the next question I was going to ask is, I'm wondering when did you begin your training in music, and how did you get interested in opera?
I will try to make this as concise as possible.
Oh, you don't have to.
I'm gonna try. I don't want to talk that much. Does anyone here know what pop punk is, or am I gonna get like a generational divide? Okay. Rock. It's like rock music, the music that kids like. So I wanted to be a rock star, but they don't offer a degree for that. Not at the time, anyway. Now it's totally different. So I did the second best thing, which was music education. And then later switched to vocal performance, a triple major vocal performance, composition, theory, conducting. At Loyola, I met Carol, who roped me into singing with the New Orleans Opera, and I sang with them for about 8 years before I matriculated into my now administrative position, where I've been for about 2 years. And yeah, when I'm not doing that, I'm composing and flying around the country and making sure people play my music right, which is what happened today. I'm thrilled about it.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. I made it through. I was in college when, well, as a pre-med major, and I already gotten into medical schools and was going to do that. And it was somewhere in that double major where, well, before the double major, a voice teacher that knew me, I played for her students in the music department, and she said, you know, you'd be a really good coach accompanist if you ever wanted to pursue that. I'm like, what is that? You know, and you know, as a pianist, you always think that okay, you're either going to be a concert pianist or you'll teach, and that as if those are the only viable career options, you know. And so then I listened to. She gave me an assignment to go to the library and. Where you check out these records and you're in like a listening booth, and I happened to pick a recording of Maria Callas singing Tosca, and a recording of well, a bunch of them, but there's that, and then there was one of Renata Tebaldi singing Butterfly, and it was. I was in the listening booth in college, like crying and listening to this music and going, why did this teacher tell me to do this? And so then I kept playing for students, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll do this. And then I went to grad school instead of medical school, and upset my family. No, they were fine. They were very happy. So yeah, that's...
So I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition. I went to a church in Mobile called Spring Hill Baptist Church. It was actually the organization, the group there actually helped my parents when we were born with childcare, meals, and everything. And so we sort of grew up in the church. And every summer we would go on these choir tours. At first when I was singing, it was just because that's what my friends were doing. And so I liked hanging out with my friends. And I started, what were we singing? I don't remember because it was too long ago. But we were on the bus singing something, and this girl I thought was very cute said, you had a great voice. You should sing more. And I was like, I don't know if you can tell, but I am pretty awkward, just generally, and that has only aged, well, just aged with time. And so one of the things that happened is it just sort of sparks this whole, I like to call it like a runaway train, because then I went to my undergrad at the University of Alabama doing vocal performance and accounting. I was double majoring because my parents would not just let me do music. And then eventually I came and finished my degree at the University of South Alabama, went to Manhattan School of Music, and then sang for a little bit, met Chris and Claire in Portland, and then went back to LSU to finish my doctorate for the last few years, and so now I've been teaching. So I still sometimes am not sure if my dad knows what I do, but I know that he's proud of me, and I think that's the important part. It's like,
That's real.
That's real. So I grew up in a neighborhood that was a lot, at the time, full of artists in Toronto, and so our public school had a really wonderful music program, and so part of that program involved the teacher taking us to see the dress rehearsals at the Canadian Opera Company from very, very young. Combine that with the fact that my best friend growing up, her mother was Gunta Dreifelds, who, along with Latvia Mansouri, was one of the people who developed surtitle technology. So when I was growing up, if I wasn't getting like $3 tickets to go to dress rehearsals through my public school, I was sitting in the booth with Gunta, just drinking it all in. And who knows why, but my 8-year-old self just fell in love with opera right away. It was Lucia de Lammermoor, of all operas, was the first one. And I thought to myself, if I can make people feel the way that this is making me feel, that will be a life well spent. And then also 8-year-old logic was like, so I must be an opera singer. That's the only way to work in opera, is to be an opera singer. So from ages 8 to age 17, I was hyper-focused on getting into my first choice music school for vocal performance, which I did. And then the second I stepped on stage for people who weren't my family and friends, I was like, oh, I hate this. being on stage and performing for people. So that threw me into a quarter-life crisis. I took a year off from school, thought about what it is I actually enjoyed about opera. Things I came up with were I loved rehearsing, I loved thinking about things, I loved collaboration, I loved that feeling. I loved choir, I loved that feeling of working with people towards a shared goal and making something beautiful in the process. So my next best guess was I thought I might want to be a stage director, and luckily that was a better guess than the first guess. And here we are today.
I grew up as a violinist, and I sang in high school choir by accident because I had tried to take a theater class, and I ended up in a ESL theater class where nobody spoke English, and so the only other option for my elective was choir, and so that's how I ended up in choir. And then I went to college, and I majored in violin performance and psychology, and I actually got into a grad program thinking I wanted to go to psychology and help people deal with performance anxiety. And we're going to take your number. And somewhere...
I needed you 20 minutes ago.
I needed me 20 minutes ago. Somewhere in there, a wealthy woman from Santa Barbara, my hometown, came up to me and said, you know, I remember you in high school choir, and I remember your voice when you had a solo, and I want to give you some money to take some voice lessons while you're in college. I was a senior in college, and so she gave me, I don't know, $500 or something, and I found a grad student I was at Boston University, and I found a grad student. I started having a few lessons with her, and one day in walks this woman who ended up being my teacher, a good friend of Doug's as well, Penny Beatus, and she walked in and then was surprised that it was me and not her grad student singing, and she said, you need to be an opera singer. And I said, oh no, I hate opera. I hate opera singers, I hate everything about opera. I'd been in music school for 4 years. I was like, no, this is not for me. And somehow she just convinced me to apply for a master's degree in voice. And I said, okay, I'll do it at BU, and I got a much larger scholarship to do a master's in voice than I did for anything in psychology. I thought, I can always go back to psychology later. I can't necessarily ever go back to voice later. So that's how I ended up a singer.
So I was classically trained in piano. I started when I was 7 years old. My brother started in classical violin when he was 6. He also played the piano. I continued. My first piano teacher was Betty Downs, who was the music director at the Chinese Presbyterian Church, but she also worked for one of the Baptist churches. And then my second piano teacher was Alexandra Sechrist, who used to teach at Tulane. And I continued playing a piano all the way to the end of high school. Almost all of the Asian Americans that I grew up with here in New Orleans actually played some sort of instrument. And we were, in fact, I think the Greater New Orleans, I think my brother might have been one of the founding members of the Greater New Orleans Youth Orchestra. I'm not sure how far, or at least from very near the beginning. And he was a first violin. And yeah, I was all dominated by all us Asian Americans in that orchestra. And what I was taught, in fact, Alexandra Sechrist said this to me, that there's this idea that if you play music, it will help improve your math skills. So that seems to be the main reason why all of these Asian American parents wanted us to learn an instrument, which, by the way, is not true. I'm terrible at math, so all that music training didn't help. But this is a really interesting conversation, and I'd like to keep this going because, I've had students that actually were just like me. They, I guess their parents they've been playing music for their whole life because I guess their parents thought that would help them get into college or something. But, it's like, they actually enjoyed it. They weren't being forced to play this music. They actually genuinely enjoyed playing music. I remember one student in particular had told me that she just would have kept playing music professionally if that were an option. And that's an issue that a lot of Asian Americans have not really thought of this as a career. I mean, some of them, I think, like minored in music, but then they had to become a physician or something that would actually make money. But I was wondering if you could talk about how your families reacted to, going into the music career. Mostly I'm like fishing for some sort of like words of encouragement or something.
I have no words of encouragement. I I know I said I'd let you guess my birth order, but I'm number 8. Did you say 1?
No, I thought it was the last. I thought it was
Oh, like the baby? I'm very sweet, but no, I'm not. I'm not the baby. I'm number 8, so I'm lower middle quadrant. Upper lower quadrant. Yeah, it is. I agree. So, I mean, that's kind of a privilege I have to a degree. A lot of my older siblings are the ones who experienced those pressures, and by the time I was of age to go to college, my dad had passed away, and my mom was busy with the other 10 children in my family. So I kind of like got out and ran away to New Orleans.
What's the question?
Words of encouragement.
Oh, well, my mother knew when I first started taking piano lessons that I was supposed to do it then, and she was just sort of waiting for me to just come around. And then when I did in college, she of course was like, "Okay, great. I've been waiting since 7th grade, and so I'm happy that you did that." And then it was more of the fact that I'm the youngest of 4, so I had older siblings that could take over the farm. And so I didn't have to do any of that. I didn't have the burden of that responsibility. So once that was sort of secured, I could have just, I could have done anything. Because love goes a long way. Yeah.
Great words of encouragement.
So I am not the youngest or the 8th. I'm the firstborn. And so I had a lot of pressure to not do any of this. This was not what my dad wanted me to do. My mom came around after I got my doctorate because she's like, terminal degree.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, security, you can now have a job. Which I do, I have a job, so I guess she's not wrong. I mean, and I appreciate like her guiding me in that direction because, even since I started singing has changed. I mean, like the industry is rapidly evolving, which is really cool. But growing up, they put me in piano lessons because they're like math, and I actually am pretty good at math, but I don't think it had to do with piano because I never practiced. So I've sort of always been the black sheep. Now I think about it, because my brother, initially I was supposed to take over the family business. My dad was running some form of real estate thing. I still don't know what he did either, so I guess that's good. But my brother went into business. He got his MBA, and he did all of that. My sister was a laboratory assistant. She majored in chemistry, and they both have kids now too. And so I've always sort of been the loose cannon. I think one of the things that drove me into music was I remember when the first opera I saw, I was in 1st grade, and it was an abridged version of the Nouvelle di Figaro, and I definitely fell asleep, and I was like, oh, this is weird. The second opera I saw was Rigoletto. It was in Mobile, and I was a senior. I was volunteering as an usher, and I remember leaving an intermission because I was like, that guy is just yelling at people, like just straight up yelling at these people left and right. I mean, that's a pretty, what are they, I don't know, why are they yelling at each other? But I remember my junior year, I was part of La Boheme, and I mean, as trite as it is to say that Boheme like made me understand the power of opera, it really did. There were just moments, and I don't know if I was just like finally becoming my own person and feeling and being able to express feelings, but it just like swept me away in a way that just made me understand the power and the importance of the art form. And that was the same year that I quit my accounting major, so I was doubling down. And luckily, I am not homeless, so that is the important thing going forward. But really, the thing about it is, I tell all my students this now. Actually, music is, if you think you need to make $300,000 a year, music's going to be kind of difficult to get to that. But if you know you want to connect with people, if you know you want to create something, if you know you want to be part of a community that is uplifting and really engaged in both social change as well as like the cultivation of the art form, I mean, you can't find a better group of people to join with, and a lot of us make a pretty good living, so I think it's okay, you don't need all the money in the world, just need enough to pay your bills. Sorry. One-on-one accounting.
Oh my gosh. I also love math, but that's beside the point. I really feel like I am a I owe a lot to my family and my community. We didn't have, my mother is a teacher and she teaches early childhood education, but she also teaches music, and my father is a writer, and we grew up and we didn't have a lot of money, but because of where I grew up in Toronto, there were a lot of public funds available to send me to various programs and things like that. My voice teacher in high school gave me lessons for free for a long period of time because we couldn't afford to pay for lessons. I found out recently that this music camp I went to when I was like 11 years old, my parents couldn't afford to pay for it, so the parent council of the school pooled money to send me. So I hope I'm doing my parents proud, and I hope I'm getting a little emotional. I hope I'm doing my community proud because they invested a lot in me. Yeah.
I remember being, 24, 25 years old and calling my mom on the phone. I was waitressing and I kept taking auditions and I didn't get any work. And, Mom, why did you encourage me to be an opera singer? I'm going to wait tables for the rest of my life. And, she said, I wanted to encourage you to do what you love. And I really saw you loving opera. She's an artist, and my dad was a school teacher, and my brother is also a professional musician. But I think your question actually brings up something that's really important. I'm one of the founders of the Asian Opera Alliance. Actually, André is on our board as well. And what we advocate for is representation, because if you cannot see that it's possible, how will you ever know that it's possible? Mm-hmm. And so if we don't have Asian faces up on that stage and our, young Asian kids are in the audience, how will they ever know that it's possible for them to have a career if they can't see themselves?
Ooh. So.
Yeah. I do have one more thing to say about a comment before we move on to, I guess, audience questions. But yeah, because I work for the Historic New Orleans Collection, but I have another exhibit at the New Orleans Museum of Art right now, and it's the Catherine Choi exhibit. Catherine Choi immigrated to this country from Shanghai. She was actually born in Hong Kong, and she went to college first, I think, at Wellesley, and then I think at somewhere in California. And I think she was a literature major at first, and then she switched to ceramics, and she became this ceramics artist. She went to Mills College, I think, and then ultimately she ended up teaching at Newcomb. And this is the 1950s, by the way. She started at Newcomb she came to this country right after the Second World War. She was teaching at Newcomb in the 1950s. So we've got a Chinese American woman, and she's in her mid-20s. She wasn't much older than her students. This Chinese American woman teaching ceramics at a college in a segregated university in the South. We created a catalog for that exhibit. I wrote one of the chapters, the one that talks about her biography. One of the questions that was asked was, what did her family think about her career in the arts? And what it is that Catherine Choi's father was a prosperous department store manager, and he was a major patron of the arts in Shanghai. And his department store actually had a gallery in the department store. It was reserved for art exhibitions, and they often had local arts. In fact, they actually sold folk arts in the department store. Mr. Choi was very much encouraging of his daughter's career. In fact, his daughter was doing research. She would research like the history of pigments in Chinese art and traditional Chinese ceramics, and her father would find these ingredients and send them back here to New Orleans, where she would use them to reconstruct some of these slips that she was using. So, Catherine Choi, she enjoyed a tremendous encouragement from her family. In fact, her father used to take all the kids out to like art shows and art galleries, and so even though she was never trained in traditional Chinese art, she was very familiar with it just from growing up around it. These stories that I'm getting, I was actually expecting more of you to like have some sort of earlier interaction with opera. I actually picked up opera from my father because he was actually a big fan of Pavarotti. So I grew up listening to Pavarotti singing. So anyway, some questions?
Right. Can everybody hear my loud Wagnerian voice? Yeah. All right. See, voice lessons for 20 years paid off. So we have some audience questions. Hopefully we get to all of them. I do realize that we've already been sitting here, and this is the time we told y'all that, you know, it would be over. Thank you for those of us who can stay. If you have to duck out, we understand. But I want to make sure that we honor these questions that y'all have given us. So, in no particular order, and this question is for anyone and everyone on the panel. How do we relate today's Asian American experience to Madame Butterfly? How do we relate the music of today's Asian American composers to Puccini? Ooh, I see wheels. I see all of the wheels turning.
Nina has a mission statement that she can talk about.
So, how do we relate
today's Asian American experience to Madame Butterfly, and how do we relate the music of today's Asian American composers to Puccini?
As far as the music goes, I think we can, you know, look at Puccini and say, well, how do we relate him to Handel or Bach or whatever, right? So everyone is influenced by the people who come before them, and I can say that about, you know, all of the Asian American composers that I know as well. And as far as how we relate Madame Butterfly to today's experience, I think when we look at, you know, how I said at the beginning, when we only have one view of what we think this Japanese culture is, we start to, you know, create stereotypes in our mind. For example, if I were to ask you all to picture an Asian American woman in your mind, I would imagine that a lot of you either picture like this sweet, little, kind, quiet, you know, geisha-like woman of Madame Butterfly, or the tiger mom, ice queen, you know, of Turandot, right? And so as we are seeing things on stage, you know, on TV, they seep into our own minds and how we look at the people in our societies. So I don't know that, like, the actual story of Madame Butterfly necessarily relates very much to the Asian, you know, fourth generation Japanese American. I am so far removed from Japanese culture. You know, I get up on that stage. I had to learn about what it meant to be Japanese when I started playing Suzuki. I didn't know before that. I was just American. And so, so I think that it's more about these stereotypes and perpetuating harmful stereotypes that we tend to focus on in the Asian American community. Anyone else?
I just might want to put another way something that you've already alluded to, Nina, but I think terms like Asian American and any of these terms we use to describe whole communities are insufficiently small words to encompass all of the experiences that they're meant to describe. And so I think when it comes to how do we relate the Asian American experience, Asian Canadian experience to Madame Butterfly, I think in a multitude of ways, in whatever way that they feel inspired to tell that story, or not tell that story, or challenge that story, or reject that story. I think in the same way that we give ourselves creative freedom to engage with other titles, I think we should not expect anyone sitting on this panel to be able to surmise the multitude of experiences of the Asian American community in a single show. We should just require of them to pull forward the things that are resonating with them about the piece.
No, I just think for the sake of time,
Yeah.
let's get to these
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
We don't have to answer.
Go,
We don't all have to
rapid
answer
fire.
everyone. Well, the rest will be here till midnight.
Awesome. Thank you for those answers. And Nina said it earlier, Butterfly is a fantasy from a person who had never been to Japan. All right, so What would be a positive Asian American subject to use for an opera that is not painful?
So I'm just gonna take. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not writing an opera, but we were just talking in the kitchen because this program I fully recognize is quite heavy. You know, I think I'm quickly reminded of the author Ta-Nehisi Coates, and if you don't know this name, Google it and then run to your nearest independent bookstore. Who recently was interviewed because of what's going on right now in Florida and education and book banning and all things of decades and decades and years and centuries ago. He said so 70% of history is negative. It's not all rainbows and sunshine. So, and that doesn't mean that it's not. First of all, it's not rainbows and sunshine, so it shouldn't be. So that's just the reality of it, right? Now, as far as the Asian American experience, I was telling Nina, I said, this poet that I love so much, Inada, who I learned later was the son of my father's dentist, and whose mother's side of the family ran the Fresno Fish Market, which all of my family knew their family. I didn't even know any of this until I delved into this poetry. Well, this was just one book, a set of poems called Legends from Camp that I started drawing from. In this book, there's a ton more, hundreds more of poems that are about his life and experience as a human being. He happens to be third generation Japanese American who experienced the living in the incarceration camps of World War II, and that's a portion of his life, right? But there's a wealth of poetry that is wonderful, that is, I'll say, positive. But for me, positive is essentially just what is honest about one's human experience, right? But it's wonderful things about his life of growing up in a certain part of Fresno where a little Japanese American boy wouldn't have experienced that normally because, for instance, my father was not in that same neighborhood, and they have two entirely different experiences, both being third generation Japanese Americans, right? So in looking through a lot of his poetry, I've learned a lot about jazz, number one, from his poetry, right? I've learned a lot about what it means to live in a community that is, for instance, very conservative in many ways, and to still find community with neighbors and friends and colleagues through this man's poetry. So I think it totally exists, right? It's a matter of it being put pen to paper, I think, at this point, since enough of this is occurring. And I would say even further, like the poems you said, there's so many things of that resonated with me personally, psycho-emotionally, and it just so happens that it's a uniquely Asian experience. However, there's plenty. I went down a rabbit hole of Google searches of Ocean Vuong's poetry after looking at these songs, to discover all kinds of different perspectives of the human experience, right? So I think the obvious gateway and the into it, I'm sure, is through the biggest events that happens in one's life and trauma, which is a lot of trauma, right? So it's natural for that to occur. But anyway, that's a loaded answer. But
well, also we were talking about as he adds more to his song cycle, what ways can we make it a little more, add a little more levity?
Like, for instance, we were talking about the dancing that happened in these camps. Yeah, I said internment again, because we were raised to saying this. The dance or the baseball games that happened in these camps, right? So
there was a lot of joy for the kids. The adults made sure that the kids were filled with joy, and so there are stories of joy within. I
just think, though, that the first thing that a poet is going to write is not going to be what makes me happy in life, and then write a poem, right? It's just that's typically not how this happens, because it's a reactive art form, and it does exist, but that's not usually the first. Okay, anyway. Go ahead. Thomas.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, this next question is for Andre and Nina. As a performer, wow, my New Orleans accent is really trying to come out. I'm sorry. I couldn't even say the word performer. What is your process for preparing to interpret works that carry such weight and such social responsibility?
If it's closer, so I'll go first. One of the things I really like to do is read through the poem and see how that like sits with me. Sort of read it at my witching hour, which is post 11 p.m. And so I sort of read it and sort of let it simmer and like feel, let my feelings sort of go with it first. And then like start listening to the music and then feel how the music moves me without the poetry. And then sort of integrate both into one another. One of the big things that I love about opera and art song especially, is that art song leaves you very vulnerable. Like there's two performing forces. You can make all sorts of noises because you don't have to project to the back of a hall. And I think what I've started really loving about the art form is how vulnerable it allows me to be with my voice. And so that's sort of the next sort of step for me. Like, where can I make this very authentic to my experience in that moment, as well as authentic to the process of the creator and the process of performing it. And that sort of is where sometimes my artistic side and my reasonable side come to fight each other, because sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna go there, and the reasonable side's like, if you go there, you can't come back. And so I think that's the coolest part about singing. You know, it's our instrument is inside of us. The creative process is deeply embedded into how we do everything and how we interpret it and what our experience is with different colors and shapes and forms of phonation. And I just think to me, it's a fun time to play. Every time I'm going to sing Dylan's songs, they're going to be very different. Hopefully not wildly different pitch-wise, but like very different emotionally, because some days maybe I'm very happy, and then the parts that are really intimate and like authentically joyous are going to have a much greater meaning. Maybe it's raining outside, and so like the water imagery has a different effect. And I think that's the coolest part about live performance. Like you have to allow yourself to sort of ebb and flow with it, take away some of like the structure of this has to be this way, at least in my opinion, and give yourself over to a performance that'll be authentic to that moment, to that day. So.
I would also say similarly to Andre, I try and really make it me. I sit with the words and everything, and it becomes me, and I find a way that it relates somehow to my life, and from there I will oftentimes go a little bit too far, to the point that like it's so emotional that I can't sing anymore, and I know where that line is for me. I know where I cross it. I know what I can think and what I can't think, what will push me there. Because we also do have to have control over our voices as we're singing, and we can't always let, my job is to move you, my job is not to move myself. And so I find that line a lot of times, and it's a very, especially with stuff like this, I had never been an advocate before the pandemic, and so it's been a huge learning experience as I'm presenting recitals like this and doing talks like this. Like, how can I learn and how can I grow? And so I spend a lot of time really, really digging into that to make sure that I'm doing my community justice.
Thank you. All right. This question's for the composers. What specifically drew you to these particular writers' poetic style?
This was sort of, a little backstory, I guess. I met Nina in, it was after we had already met. I think it was the second time.
Spring last year, yeah.
Yeah, and we thought, okay, well, we've known of each other for a while. Let's actually get together and who do you know? Who do you know? The whole thing, like, oh, you know so and so, of course. Everyone knows everybody in opera, and so, but there are I don't know many Japanese Americans who are specifically half Japanese, which is a very specific cultural experience as a Japanese American, and that's a whole other thing to talk about another time, another day. But it was great to find someone else, and that's why I'm looking forward to getting to know you too, Aria. I know you said Japanese Canadian, and so but all that to say, I told Nani, I said I really want there to be an opera or a song cycle, something about the incarceration experience of the Japanese Americans, and I just said, do you know any Japanese American composers? I don't want to do Japanese. I need you to understand that this is a Japanese American thing, and so we had this whole connection about that, the difference, and then push comes to shove, we go back and forth, you know this composer, or and then she finally goes, well, I just think that you're supposed to write these. And I, at the moment you sort of look over your shoulder and like, oh, me, okay, yeah, I don't do that, thanks. I interpret people's works, but I don't create them. And it's much easier to sort of criticize that way, right? And then, and so then I sort of sat with it for a while, and I thought, okay, I guess I will, sort of. And I never told Nina, yes, I'm gonna write these songs, but it was definitely probably okay, I think, sure, I'll give this a try. And then fast forward to, I don't know how many weeks or months later, when
6 months later.
Yeah, when Tara includes me in an email about this recital, and that includes part of the chain of emails earlier where Nina says, "Oh yeah, Doug's writing me a set of songs about day, so we can include that on the program." And so I'm like, okay, there's nothing like a deadline. And so that's essentially how that happened. But I had already spent so many hours reading through Inada's poetry. And then, and I had already sort of decided I was going to commission a composer or something like this. So I had already selected the poetry that I wanted it to be. Not the specific poems, but the group of poems, right? And so what drew me to him was the specific experience. There's only a handful there's not a wealth of poetry out there about this very specific experience, right? But there is more than I realized. And then I thought, and then it was incredible that he was from Fresno, and all my family is from Fresno. And then we knew the same people, or our families all knew each other. And then there was the fact that a lot of them were short, which meant that being able to write a song for the first time was less scary, right? Yeah. So it wasn't anything like really, it wasn't this big philosophical moment. It was just pragmatic in many ways. But it sort of forced me to put pen to paper, and now it's sort of like my new venture. And through it, I would say that, at Boston University, I teach 3 different courses. It's a 3-part sequence, all on song literature. And the bulk of our time together is really looking at these songs, which is looking at the music through the filter of the composer, through the filter of the poet, through the filter of then what caused the poet to write the words, right? And that's the way we fully understand and can analyze and judge and critique and form aesthetic viewpoints about a song. And so it was really an incredible experience. At one point I told my wife, who was here earlier, and you might have seen her around because she's the costume director for New Orleans Opera, and she said, if you don't know enough to write a song, I don't think many composers go through the process of spending hours and hours of analyzing poetry. And so it was encouraging in that regard, and I thought, wow, I actually think I might know something to begin this. So that was the pretty much how this all sort of occurred, and then specifically to the poets I chose and why and how.
I'm glad you did. I enjoyed the songs a lot. I discovered Ocean Vuong on Google. I was just looking for Vietnamese American poetry, and I found a poem he wrote called Kissing in Vietnamese about his grandma, and it really resonated with me. I also have a grandma, so we have that in common. He was coming through New Orleans to do some research. This was like 2018, 2017, and I reached out to him on Instagram, and I was like, hey, I'm a big fan. If you're doing something public, I would love to just stop by and just say hi. I don't want to take up any of his time. This It's like a MacArthur genius, level stuff. And he was like, "Shut up, come hang out with me." And so we went and got a beer, and I told him what a fan I was, and he said, "Use any of it and do anything you want." And we talked a lot about, I did some ethnomusicology on my own of traditional court, folk. There's so many different kinds of Vietnamese music, and all sorts of stuff I was looking into. And there are certain aspects of that inform my musical writing. It's one of my influences, I think. And he was talking to me about how he has done the same with Vietnamese poetry. There is this beautiful asymmetry that happens that I cannot explain to you, but I'll tell you about it. And it's incredible, and he uses that in his writing, and I love what he does with form. I love that it is simultaneously unbalanced and asymmetric, but also completely organic and genuine, and everything is there. And stylistically, I think that's what drew me to it, was that there was formal inspiration, and also even everything from macro down to micro. I mean, the individual choice of words, it's this beautiful blend of colloquial and plain speak with just rich poetic imagery. And I loved getting to play between those things.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Dylan, have you known his book before you met him? Because there is a novel
Yes.
you wrote. And
I met him
know
before.
through-
Sorry to interrupt. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
I knew him from, when I saw his name. His book is beautiful, and
Yes.
it is also very poetic, right?
It's so poetic, and the form, and I don't want to take any time with this, but the form of the novel is incredible. It's a novel the whole way through, and then there's this climactic point where it explodes into poetry, and just that play that he does is really appealing to me. I met him before the book was out, and I got an advanced copy of the book. That was not from him. That's because I worked at Barnes and Noble.
Why did he come to New Orleans?
There's a robust Vietnamese community here, and he just wanted to explore some of the stories, of which there are many.
Because I was thinking maybe he was going to sign his book or something. I missed
he was just hanging out.
Awesome.
All right. So for our last question, do you have any words of wisdom for young Asian Americans navigating this world? Our granddaughter was adopted in China.
Community. Yeah, just find your people, and that happens in so many different ways, and it takes all different lengths of time, and people will all mean different things to you, but I think that's my general advice, is find your community and be open to what that looks like, and be hopeful.
I'd say always figure out what you love and find ways to integrate that into your life. And sometimes it's not going to be the straightest path. Most of the time it's not the straightest path, but I think one of the things that's really important is that when you look back at your life, oh God, I'm talking legacy. Okay, when you look back at your life, that you see something that you see all the ups and downs and the failures and successes, but you see the totality of it as something worth living. And I think a lot of things that really bring people joy are the things that they just are ingrained in their psyche, in their soul, the things that they love, and the way to express that. I mean, if people love to be lawyers, that's great. If people love to be musicians, that's great. If people love to just, weld, I thought about being an underwater welder at one point, sorry. Then that's fine too, but I think it's one of those things where, the path is never straight, and so allowing it to zig and zag, allowing it to move into different communities here and there, it's just so interesting how when you look back, it's like, wow, all these things actually did come together to create who I am now. And just being open to those experiences, I think, is the important part.
Words of wisdom. I think I'm too young to be wise. At least I hope I am. But I think one thing that I think will resonate with Asian Americans, Asian Canadians, Hafus, mixed people of mixed ancestry, is that, and it sounds like for this young person who is adopted, there's a lot of pressure to embody being Asian in a specific way. There's a lot of pressure to behave a certain way, say a certain way, know certain things. And for a lot of people in our community who are disconnected from the homeland, so to speak, in various different ways, it might be impossible it might feel at times impossible to rise up to the expectations that others around you might have for what your relationship to your Asian heritage is. And so I think I would just say to this person, you are Asian, and whatever relationship you create through research, through food, through music, through poetry, through community, that is enough, and you are enough, and I hope that it brings you joy and adds beauty and color to your experience, and just resist the pressure to let other people tell you what it means to be where you're from or who you are. I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that's a very good
I don't know if we have time for one more comment, but I mean, I've seen a tremendous amount of cynicism and hopelessness among young people, among young Asian Americans right now. They're growing up in the shadow of the pandemic a lot, and they've been going to school under quarantine. But I have to say that it's from talking to young people that's what gives me hope and helps me move forward. Because I've been studying Asian American history for quite some time, and I've been watching this growing anti-Asian sentiment growing for many years now. I've been warning people for really since 2016 that the kind of violence that we're seeing was inevitable, because I was seeing all the anti-Asian hate escalating even before the violence did. So yeah, I mean, the advice that I would give to young people is to always things, it may not look like things are getting better, but from what I can tell, yeah, things are always going to get better. And seeing all the activism, seeing Asian Americans right now, you see that what's happening right now is there's a growing awareness of this Asian American identity. More Asian Americans are trying to learn about their history. We see that even here in this panel. So that's what really gives me hope, and I would hope that young people will think about that and learn more about themselves, learn about their communities, and I think, look to the future. So, yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you to our panel. Everybody is putting out I will always thank you for being here. I will always, in these situations especially, thank you for your vulnerability, because it's not easy to get up and do what you all did, which is share who you are in the totality of who you are in front of complete strangers who probably who are all at varying degrees of knowing and awareness in themselves of what the current situation in this country and in the world may be. So thank you all for coming and for being open, and we hope to see you very soon. Y'all going to Butterfly, right? Just making sure. All right. Well, we hope to see you soon, and there will be many more things coming. And yeah, that's it for today. All right. I do.